Alright guys, today we're going to be reacting to the Club Meme, the loss of history of a Germany trendy soda. Thank you so much for the support guys, thank you so much for everything you guys have done for the channel, I really appreciate it. We're going to simply jump into the disc video. For those that are subscribing to the channel, thank you so much, I really appreciate it. We're heading to 10,000 subscribers, but also let's just get to that 4,000 man. 4,000 is the mark folks, and you guys can get me there, I will gonna really appreciate it. Meantime, guys, let's jump in and see what's going on here.
Enter any German supermarket and you're guaranteed to find this. Club Mate,
Club
probably
Mate.
among its many competitors. At first glance, it's just another soda or sparkling iced tea. Okay, a soda with a very special taste, we'll get to that. But Club Mate is so much more than that. It's a cultural icon, an essential part of life in urban Germany. What's most fascinating though is nobody really seems to know where Club Mate really came from. I grew up in Berlin and I remember how around 20 years ago, almost overnight, Club Mate was everywhere you looked. Completely out of nowhere, or so it seemed. What a lot of people knew is that Club Mate was made from Yerba Mate, a South American plant a little similar to tea. I mean, it says so right here on the bottle. What only a few people knew is that the rise of the drink had something to do with Berlin's underground techno and computer hacking scenes. But what nobody knew is that Club Mate was actually 100 years old and had almost disappeared not once, but twice before it even got popular. As a Berliner, naturally I thought this is a story that deserves to be told. So I reached out to the one brewery that exclusively produces Club Mate. I thought maybe I could do an interview or get a tour of the factory, but no. Instead I got the most peculiar reply. The company said they really like my channel, but as a general rule, they don't do any type of marketing or publicity whatsoever.
Wow.
I don't even think that's an excuse. Nobody had ever seen a commercial for Club Mate, no sports team
That means that they're very confident of their product. That's what it means. They really trust their
or
product.
event is ever sponsored by Club Mate. So what's with all the secrecy? What is the 100+ year story of Club Mate, and how did it go from a South American jungle tea to Germany's trendiest drink without ever running a single ad? I have all the answers to all of your questions, but to truly get to the bottom of the story, we first need to understand its hero ingredient, and that is Yerba Mate.
Yerba
Yerba
Mate.
Mate has deep roots in South America, where it's a wild plant native to the Parana region of Brazil. The indigenous Guarani, for example, cherished it and were chewing and sipping on mate leaves, both for energy and as a medicine, way before the first Europeans had even showed up. In the 16th century, Jesuit monks came over from Europe and fell in love with mate. It was actually them who pioneered the first large-scale cultivation methods, which was big because mate only grew wild before that. With that innovation, over the next few centuries, the popularity of mate skyrocketed, earning it the nickname green gold. And that pretty much lasts to this day. Yerba Mate is grown and consumed in crazy quantities in countries like Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil. It's known for its health benefits and as a more pleasant energy
So it's basically like a tea, basically.
booster than coffee. But the real magic lies in the social ritual. In South America, drinking yerba mate is a communal activity. People gather in a circle, pass around a special gourd filled with the tea, and sip through a metal straw called a bombilla. The taste is kind of grassy and smoky because it does get dried and lightly roasted over fire traditionally, but it does have that pleasant tea-like depth and a mild hint of bitterness. Even though it's definitely an acquired taste, I actually think it's pretty good. But in 19th century Europe, yerba mate was virtually unheard of. Only a few doctors, scientists, and maybe wealthy world travelers would have even heard of yerba mate, and they all agreed that due to its harsh taste and complicated drinking method, this stuff was not going to catch on in Europe. But there was something they had all missed. In the 19th century, there's this big health and lifestyle movement across Europe and North America. Without going too deep into that rabbit hole, people were moving away from alcoholic drinks like beer and wine all day, every day, and increasingly replacing them with mildly stimulating beverages like tea and coffee or medicinal
Yeah, I didn't know that. Wow. So it was a conscious movement, probably. It was a very conscious movement.
or just tasty soda pops, carbonated sweetened drinks. Some of the most successful drinks even combined both. Remember, this is the era where Coca-Cola and Vern Mariani were born, which both contained cocaine. I made a video about that before, which I'm gonna put here? I think here. In short, the market for soda and lemonade across the world was booming, and entrepreneurs were eagerly experimenting to discover the next big thing. And if you look hard enough, you can come across this 1906 food encyclopedia published in Imperial Germany. It mentions Yerba Mate, a Yerba Mate-based sparkling drink with an extraordinarily stimulating effect, perfectly suited for travelers. And if you're thinking it's just a stroke of luck that the first mate-produced soda happens to have been produced in Germany, I don't think so. This is not a coincidence. Since the 19th century, significant numbers of Germans have been migrating to Brazil for work or seeking a better life. To this day, you have German towns in Brazil's Paraná region, and they look more German than Germany itself, and even host huge Oktoberfests. That region, of course, happens to be exactly where Yerba Mate is from, so it would only be a matter of time.
Man, Germans, bro, you guys are everywhere, man. This is crazy, man.
Until some savvy people back in the German motherland would get their hands on some mate, love its health benefits and stimulating effects, and think to themselves, if only this stuff tasted better, we'd really have a cool product on our hands. Well, here's a thought. Why not try turning Yerba Mate into one of these super trendy sparkling sodas? The first ones with that idea were actually two dudes from the German city of Dresden all the way back in 1903. They owned a beverage factory and, very conveniently, a drinking hall right in the city center. Their mate soda was called Hectormin, and I don't know if it's the terrible name or just bad luck, but that project seems to have fizzled out within a few years without any notable success.
What's the name?
But let's get back to that old food encyclopedia.
100% what's the name?
Remember how it actually mentions a very particular brand called Yerba Mate, and if you look at the very end of the article, you'll see it even mentions the manufacturer. Enter Hugo Obst. As an entrepreneurial pharmacist from the German city of Bayreuth, he is all in on the soda gold rush and experiments with making tasty things from mate extract. Only 3 years after the guys in Dresden, and with apparently no connection to them whatsoever, he comes up with his own mate soda. His business instincts seem to be much better. He moves his production to Köstritz in nearby Thuringia, where he attracts a few business partners and investors, and his mate soda grows into a pretty promising new product. If only World War I didn't get in the way. With the German economy and supply lines from South America completely disrupted, Obst's mate company goes bankrupt within a few years. But even though production stopped for almost an entire decade, the drink had already generated a small but somewhat loyal fan base. Even though Obst himself had died around the beginning of the war, some of his business partners revived the beverage in the 1920s. They sold it as Bronte or Sektbronte.
Very interesting years during the beginning of the 20th century for Germany. I would say, man, if a lot of these things didn't happen, Germany will be in a bigger position that is currently. Oh, you never know, right? You never know. Probably they will just be a very passive state and just be themselves. You never know, right?
Sekt being the German word for sparkling wine, which mate sodas definitely do resemble. They even launched a second brand, by all accounts the exact same stuff as Bronte, just with a different label slapped over it. So now they call it Club Mate and target a different demographic.
Okay.
So yes, Club Mate first appears exactly 100 years ago under that name, even though it's essentially the exact same stuff as Yerba Mate, which had been invented another 20 years before that. Both were marketed as healthier, more refreshing, alcohol-free substitutes. And step by step, Sekt Bronte and Club Mate were winning over more and more people.
That's
so much so that
about.
by the 1930s, the brewery in Köstritz actually couldn't keep up with the high demand, so they had to license a dozen or so smaller factories to help manufacture additional quantities for them. Once again, mate soda, this time already under the name Club Mate, was ready to take over the world, and once again, a world war gets in the way. It was essentially the same story. The economy and supply lines were under heavy strain, and sparkling iced tea was hardly a priority in the war-torn Third Reich. And who knows, right? Maybe production could have picked up after the war again, like it did before, with Germans continuing to enjoy Club Mate. But history had other plans. On October 7th, 1949, the Socialist German Democratic Republic is founded, officially kicking off decades of a divided Germany. The original brewery in Köstritz was quickly nationalized, and the new government mostly tasked it with producing, license other manufacturers to produce it for them. One of these sub-manufacturers, a small brewery named Geola from Dietenhofen, somehow managed to secure the rights to the original recipe. Dietenhofen was in capitalist Western Germany, so the owner could pretty much do what he wanted, and since he'd been a fan of Club Mate for decades, he decides to keep the tradition alive. They retire the vintage Bronte brand, and from the 1950s on, Club Mate is the only mate-based soda on the market.
Wow, so it was already in the culture. He saw a nice void, and he said, "You know what? I just want to put a stop of that void and just keep this tradition." He didn't give up. He didn't give up. Man, we have something very similar in Puerto Rico. It's called Malta. Malta tastes. I don't like. I don't like how it tastes. Tastes horrendous. My friend loves it. My brother loves it. I hate it. Called Malta. Malta, India. Those Puerto Ricans in the house. Do you guys try that Malta, India? It tastes like shiitake, to be honest.
Market. Giola supplied quite a few pubs and guest houses in the region with beverages, so quite a few of them would order a few cases of Club Mate here and there with their beers, still remembering the stimulating effects of Bronte from pre-war days. Decades pass as Club Mate becomes a mildly popular niche drink in just one region of Franconia in northern Bavaria and pretty much nowhere else. Or should we say, almost nowhere. You see, Club Mate had always been a love it or hate it product. Even though it was now only produced in one small local brewery, it would only be a matter of time until one dedicated fan takes a case or two to some other part of the country to become the snowball that eventually kicks off the avalanche. And presumably, that's exactly what happened. It's the 1980s, and deep in the urban centers of Germany, all sorts of subcultures are thriving, exploring alternative ways of life and thought, or exploring the boundaries of art and technology. Enter the hackers. Sometime around the late 80s and early 90s, with personal computing on the rise, a number of mostly young enthusiasts were getting together and challenging each other to what can be done with computer code. Many people call them the hackers, because they know how to use a computer. First in Hamburg, then a little later in freshly reunified Berlin, these hackers would make a discovery that would change the scene forever. Club Mate. I mean, it had a lot going for it. It was a small local product, not produced by a giant like Pepsi or Coke. Even the branding has an alternative, almost amateurish look to it. It has a lot more caffeine and only
No, I like it. I like it. It's a little witchy kind of logo. I like that.
half the sugar of Coca-Cola, keeping you awake and energized through long nights of coding. By the 90s, no hackathon or coder conference in Germany, and there were many, was complete without copious amounts of Club Mate. It would even start building a reputation as the Hackerbrause or hacker soda, fueling Germany's emerging software and tech startup scene. But aside from promising startups, Berlin around the turn of the century was also known for something else. Nightlife and techno music have been a defining part of the city's modern culture. It was the decades after reunification, with tons of real estate and legal limbo, that made the birth of legendary clubs like Berghain possible. And while it's no secret that drugs are definitely a thing in Berlin clubs, there were also legal substances for people to enjoy. There was alcohol, and there was Club Mate. I mean, club is kind of in the name and it keeps you awake, so I suppose it doesn't take a whole lot of imagination, but still. And this is where Club Mate starts cementing its role as a legendary drink for broader parts of the population. At least in Berlin, that is. The rest of the country would follow a little bit later. But yeah, I remember quite vividly when back in the 2000s, a few people in my circle of friends would insist on finding a shop that sells Club Mate every single time we'd go out clubbing. And let me mention, it wasn't exactly an easy sell, I mean, taste-wise. Most people, including me, hate it when they try it first. They say it tastes like an ashtray, which it kind of does. But it has this nice stimulating effect that when you try it for the second or third time, almost everybody eventually comes around to it. And this weird love-hate game, the whole, you gotta try it and eventually you'll like it, I promise.
Yeah, it's like a seltzer. You try like a sparkling water, so the first time you never tried, you're like, man, the thing tastes bad, doesn't have a flavor, but then you start liking it, you cannot stop. It's the same thing, man.
It all just added to the buzz. The crazy and even genius part is that the brand truly relied 100% on word-of-mouth marketing. The whole mystique and I don't give a fuck attitude of Club Mate helped it grow organically, carried by a brand image that was alternative and edgy, yet humble. A reliable and efficient product with an interesting story that pulls people in rather than pushing itself onto them. Although to be 100% fair, that genius was probably accidental. Even though sometime in the 90s, the Giola brewery sold the rights to Club Mate to another local brewery that still owns them to this day, both of them were actually never too keen to advertise the drink. In fact, they were even reluctant to even even sell it to Hamburg or Berlin back in the day. Legend has it they would only let you buy mate if you also bought their beer, which I've tried and it's pretty average, so that's a pretty smart business move, I guess. But of course today, at least in terms of distribution, they've come around a bit and you can buy Club Mate in every major city in Germany, even in some rural areas. Oh, and in 50 plus countries all over the world. Although broader success for Club Mate outside of Germany has yet to happen. We'll see if it does, because to this day Club Mate sticks to its principle of no marketing, although this time it's definitely intentional. It's worked for them for decades. It's one of the things that made the brand mysterious and exciting, so why change? The mate soda segment is still growing rapidly, and even though since the 2000s plenty of competitors have popped up, Club Mate still remains the #1 selling mate in Germany.
Well, the thing is, here's the thing though. They don't need to. They already find their niche. They don't need to overdo it. I think they're okay where they are. If things start picking up later, I think they're open to it. However, as today, as it seems like, I think they're fine. They're fine. Let me know what you guys see in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next one.